Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the AMD 7800 XT. And the version I have is the XFX version. This card looks like it was compensating for something, because it's like almost 14 inches. This is a 5700 XT from an Alienware. Just look at the size difference. But in all seriousness, we're gonna be testing it. We're gonna run some benchmarks, we're gonna do some gaming. AMD advertises it as a 1440p card, just like the 7700 XT. However, on AMD's website, they conveniently leave out the FPS you should get in games like Starfield and Cyberpunk. So that's exactly what we'll do. We'll play some Starfield. We'll play some Cyberpunk, and we'll play some other games. And we'll just see how good this card is at 1440p. So if you're in the market for a 1440p GPU, this video is going to be pretty sicko mode. So before we get started, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And every video I post will be more sicko mode than the last. All right, let's get to it. So now let's talk about the specs of this GPU. So the 7800 XT is meant to compete with the 4070. The two biggest selling points of this card are going to be the fact that it's about $80 to $100 cheaper, as well as giving you 16 gigs versus the 12 gigs of VRAM on the 4070. Yes, it's not GDDR6X RAM, but hey, the 7800 XT is cheaper. But not only will more VRAM help in gaming, content creators, video editors can definitely benefit from a GPU that has more VRAM. Now, if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty stuff, you can definitely check out AMD's website and look at all the specs of the 7800 XT. Sometimes I think the way they name certain things is kind of dumb, like AMD Infinity Cache technology. Just name it cache. If it was actually Infinity Cache, wouldn't there be an infinite amount of cache, not 64 megabytes? I could also talk about the ray accelerators, the AI accelerators, the 37 teraflops of peak single precision compute performance. I'm not here to go balls deep in all the technical stuff. I just want to see what kind of performance the 7800 XT gives us at 1440p. Now today I'm going to be comparing to the 7700 XT when it comes to the games I'm going to test out. And obviously the 7800 XT is going to outperform it, but we're going to see by how much. Let's talk about the build that I have it in. So the CPU I'm using is the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D. Cooling it, I have the DeepCool AK620 Zero Dark Cooler. The motherboard I'm using is the gigabyte B450 Aorus Pro motherboard. 32 gigs of Corsair DDR4 RAM. A 1TB WD Black NVMe. Obviously the 7800 XT. And just a side note, like I said, this card is super long, so there is a little bit of sag. It's not super crazy, but an open box of condoms should do the trick. Also, there's a convenient switch to go from silent to performance mode. I don't advise you switch it back and forth so many times because there's a chance that it'll 850 watt EVGA power supply, and it's all inside of the Corsair 4000D airflow case. Now moving on to actual gaming, the first test I ran was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. 1440p ultra settings with ultra ray tracing, and I'm not sure why it looks a little crooked. Maybe the sagging is making the game look crooked. It was a joke, guys. It was a joke. But anyways, right off the bat, I'm using about 11 gigs of VRAM, and my FPS is at a very healthy number, over 130 FPS. Now, if you compare it to the 7700 XT, yes, I am getting better FPS on the 7800 XT, but it's not noticeable until you get a lot of detail in the scene, where in this test, the 7800 XT never dipped below 100 FPS, but the 7700 XT did hold its own. Overall, the 7800 XT is the better way to go, obviously, averaging about 149 FPS, which is great if you have a 144Hz monitor. The 7700 XT wasn't too far back at 124 FPS. So honestly, both cards are winners. They both had really good FPS. The next game I ran was Cyberpunk. 1440p ultra ray tracing settings, and like most GPUs, the 7800 XT struggled to get 60 FPS, but it didn't look too choppy. It was still playable. I will say ray tracing may not be the strongest aspect of the 7800 XT. nvidia kind of excels at that. Now when you compare to the 7700 XT, the FPS wasn't super far off. I do see why AMD doesn't advertise Cyberpunk at 1440p max settings on their website. because the 7800 XT got an average of 55 FPS. With ray tracing off, you got a whopping 109 FPS. So super playable with the 7800 XT. Just turn down some of the settings or just turn ray tracing off. Maybe even just play at 1080p. But yeah, that's Cyberpunk for you. Super heavy on your GPU. The next game I ran was Starfield. Once again, 1440p ultra settings, and during the open map missions, my FPS didn't dip below 60, and I was actually trying to pick up this girl's gun, but I picked her up instead and started to use her as a human shield. Not my fault, I was just trying to pick up her gun. Now when you compare the 7700 XT, it struggles to even hit 60 FPS. It wasn't super choppy because it was still playable, but the 7800 XT is more of what you want because it didn't dip below 60 frames per second. The 7800 XT was outperforming my benchmark card, the 3080, which is pretty impressive. So overall, the 7800 XT is a great option if you're wanting to play Starfield at max settings at 1440p. And then I ran Red Dead Redemption 2. Once again, 1440p, ultra settings, and if you look at the VRAM, I'm using almost 11 gigs of VRAM. So if you have less than that, you may not be getting all the detail you could be getting. Gone are the days of 8 gigabytes of VRAM being more than enough. I remember back when the 1080 Ti was brand new, I thought 11 gigs of VRAM was an absurd amount. But anyways, back to the game. FPS mostly stayed in the 80s, and when you compare it to the 7700 XT, I would say there's about a 15 FPS difference. What I don't understand is why am I using nearly 11 gigs of VRAM on the 7800 XT and only 5.5 on the 7700 XT? Interesting. Ended up finishing with 83 FPS on the 7800 XT, which is pretty solid, well above 60 FPS, so the gameplay is pretty smooth. But yeah, I have to figure out why the 7700 XT was using half the amount of VRAM. I'll do that later. And the final game I ran was GTA 5. It's an older game, so you'd expect the FPS to be really good at 1440p max settings, and it was. There's literally nothing to complain about. It was a pleasant day at the beach. FPS was in the 170s and rarely dropped below 150. Now when you compare to the 7700 XT, I would say there's about a 35 frame per second difference, but still pretty solid FPS on both GPUs. At least for this game, I would be happy with either card. After all this testing, after finding out what kind of FPS we're supposed to get, what does this all mean? It means that the 7800 XT is a pretty solid 1440p GPU. The only game that I couldn't hit 60 FPS at max settings with ray tracing on was Cyberpunk. But that's understandable because most GPUs have a hard time hitting 60 FPS with ultra ray tracing. It was only 5 FPS away, so just turn down to high settings and you should be fine. All the other games, including Starfield, were well above 60 FPS. And when you compare to other GPUs around the same price point, the 7800 XT easily outperforms the 7700 XT, as well as the 4060 Ti. It is a little more at $520, which is cheaper than the 4070, and according to TechSpot.com, the 7800 XT should outperform the 4070 in most games. So if you're looking for a GPU to play the latest games at 1440p max settings, this is probably the card I would go with if I want the best performance for under $600. Of course, there's the 7900 XT, the 4080, the 4090, the 7900 XTX, but those are all at least double the price. So hovering around the $500 price point, this is probably the best 1440p GPU you can get. Let me know what you guys think. Is the 7800 XT the best 1440p card you can get for around $500? I think AMD did a good job with this one. Maybe this is your next 1440p GPU. But anyways, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. If you have any questions, if you have video ideas, let me know in the comments. Me and my boys Klaus and Valentine, we three put in a lot of work to try to make every video more Sicko Mode than the last. And like always, have a Sicko Mode day.